The war, which began as a local conflict between Russia and Ukraine, has in recent weeks entered an entirely new phase. Putin appears to have decided to raise the stakes to the maximum. After the failure of negotiations with Donald Trump, which according to sources were seen as the last chance for a temporary truce, the Kremlin chose a different path: large-scale escalation. Russia is launching a new campaign aimed at completely disabling Ukraine's energy system. The strikes come in waves. Hundreds of kamikaze drones and cruise missiles simultaneously target power plants, substations, distribution nodes, and power lines. Kyiv, Dnipro, Kharkiv, Lviv. Explosions are once again heard across the country, leaving millions of people without electricity, heating, or water. This is not just another attack. It is a strategic operation designed to plunge Ukraine into an energy blackout ahead of the approaching winter. Ukrainian authorities call it energy terrorism and claim that Russia is deliberately trying to provoke a humanitarian disaster. According to Ukrainian sources, the strikes on infrastructure are coordinated from special command centers in Crimea and the Rostov region, where Russian operators work around the clock, monitoring in real time the damage to the energy grid. The Kremlin says the opposite, that this is a response to Ukrainian provocations, specifically drone attacks on Russian oil refineries. Ukraine has indeed changed its tactics. In response to the mass missile strikes, it has begun systematically targeting the most vulnerable points of the Russian economy, the oil infrastructure. In recent weeks, dozens of drone strikes have hit refineries in the Bryansk, Belgorod, Lipetsk, and Ryazan regions. Some facilities have been completely knocked out of operation, and the damage is estimated in billions of dollars. Ukrainian analysts state openly, "We are depriving Russia of the lifeblood of war, oil." Without stable fuel supplies, the Russian military loses its ability to maintain the pace of combat, while oil exports, the Kremlin's main source of foreign currency, are undermined. But the most dangerous development is where the escalation is now heading. According to NATO satellite data, Russian missiles are increasingly flying alarmingly close to Ukrainian nuclear power plants. The situation is particularly tense around the South Ukrainian and Khmelnytsky nuclear power plants. Several strikes have occurred just a few kilometers from reactor units. European experts warn that even an accidental hit could trigger a disaster of unimaginable scale. A radioactive cloud rising over Ukraine could reach Poland, Romania, Hungary, and then the rest of Central Europe within hours. Brussels is in panic. European leaders are holding emergency meetings to assess how close the world is to a new Chernobyl-scale tragedy. "This is the worst-case scenario," said one European Commission advisor. "If Russia continues to strike near nuclear sites, the consequences could be irreversible." Germany and France have already begun testing their radiation monitoring systems, and Poland is preparing evacuation plans for border regions. The United Nations has called the situation an unacceptable threat to all of Europe. The Secretary General issued a strong statement demanding an immediate halt to strikes within a 50-kilometer radius of nuclear power plants. Moscow has ignored these calls. Russian propagandists on state television openly claim that Ukraine is to blame, alleging that weapons depots and foreign instructor bases are located near nuclear facilities. Meanwhile, pressure is mounting on the White House. After Trump's attempts to reach an agreement with Putin collapsed, Washington's political elite is deeply divided. Some argue that the United States must ramp up arms supplies to Ukraine and impose sanctions on all Russian banks without exception. Others fear that excessive pressure could push Putin toward even more desperate actions. Voices in Congress are warning that we are standing on the brink of a third world war. Against this backdrop, Russia is reinforcing its military presence along its western borders. In the Belgorod, Kursk, and Bryansk regions, additional air defense systems, Iskander missile complexes, and S-400 surface-to-air missiles have been spotted being deployed. Russian media is broadcasting footage of military convoys moving toward the Ukrainian border. This buildup is accompanied by a powerful information campaign aimed at projecting the message that Russia is ready for any scenario. Ukraine, in turn, is intensifying strikes on Russian oil facilities and logistics hubs. Videos circulating online show drones hitting oil storage depots, explosions lighting up the night sky, and flames visible for tens of kilometers. Russian authorities have been forced to impose restrictions on domestic gasoline distribution, and fuel prices in some regions have nearly doubled. Economists are already calling it the beginning of a new energy war in the heart of Europe. Putin is trying to freeze Ukraine, while Ukraine is responding by cutting off Russia's oil lifeline. And in this mutual escalation, the entire continent is bearing the cost. Energy prices in Europe are climbing again, markets are reacting with panic, and energy companies are preparing for the worst-case scenario, a total collapse of supply from the region. But beneath this lies a far more dangerous logic. Analysts say Putin is deliberately escalating, knowing the West fears direct confrontation. His goal is to make Europe flinch, to show that the continent's security depends on decisions made in the Kremlin. If Europe spends the winter without heat or power, the Kremlin's narrative will blame sanctions rather than Russian missiles. On the other side, Ukraine, with vast wartime experience, is now operating with precision, relying on long-range drones and advanced navigation algorithms. Drones are increasingly appearing over Russian territory, flying hundreds of kilometers, bypassing electronic warfare systems, and striking their targets with high accuracy. These are no longer symbolic attacks. They represent a systematic strategy to undermine the enemy's economy. Amid the deepening energy crisis, Russia is tightening internal controls. Major cities are imposing restrictions on information about infrastructure damage, and media outlets are receiving instructions not to show long lines at gas stations or report fuel supply disruptions. The atmosphere increasingly resembles the late Soviet era, when official propaganda tried to preserve the illusion of stability despite growing internal decay. Meanwhile, the West is weighing new pressure measures. The European Union is discussing a complete ban on Russian LNG exports, and the United States is considering seizing the foreign assets of Russian oil companies. The situation is becoming volatile not only on the battlefield, but also in the global economy. Any next step could trigger a worldwide energy crisis, affecting countries from Europe to Asia. While politicians argue, the front line remains locked in what is increasingly described as a war of nerves. Russian strikes on Ukraine's energy grid, Ukrainian attacks on Russian oil infrastructure, Europe's fear of nuclear catastrophe, all of this is merging into a single tangled knot that diplomacy can no longer easily unravel. The world once again stands on the edge, where one wrong move could lead to disaster. While global media focus on the destroyed power plants and nighttime explosions over Ukrainian cities, a quieter but equally dramatic struggle is unfolding behind closed doors in Europe. Insiders in Brussels report growing divisions among EU leaders. Some are calling for decisive action against Moscow, while others fear that another wave of sanctions and military support for Ukraine will fully drag Europe into the war. Poland and the Baltic states insist that if Putin is not stopped now, they will be the next targets. Germany and France, by contrast, are avoiding firm commitments, though their stance will shape the EU's future strategy. Chancellor Friedrich Merz finds himself under pressure from all sides. Protests at home are mounting over rising energy and gas prices, while allies demand that he take a tough stance against the Kremlin. His latest statements have been the sharpest to date. Russia is challenging all of Europe, and if we do not respond now, tomorrow will be too late. These words are already being quoted by all major international agencies, because Germany's position will determine how far the continent is prepared to go in supporting Kyiv. At the same time, Ukraine is doing what seemed impossible just a year ago, bringing the war onto the enemy's territory. The scale of drone attacks on Russian regions has become unprecedented. Every day, Telegram channels are flooded with videos of burning oil depots, ammunition warehouses, and factories. According to some reports, the strikes have already reached the Moscow region, and one of the attacks took place only a few dozen kilometers from the capital. It seems the entire world is holding its breath, watching a conflict in the heart of Europe turn into a game without rules, where even the smallest spark could turn the whole continent into the arena of a global catastrophe.